Financing assurance is not an event, but it is a major requirement for the approval of the IMF. It's a compliance issue. So unless you have received those specific financing agreement assurances in an MOU signed by the government of Ghana and the creditors, you cannot be proceeding on that score and say that it's subject to subsequent reviews. So anytime we come to review, we are dealing with a program at this point in time, and we need to have a focus on where we are headed, and that is not done. You see, this IMF program envisages that the total financing gap of government over the 3-year period is $15 billion. Out of that $15 billion, the IMF expects to give us $3 billion over 3 years, leaving a balance of about $12 billion. The World Bank will give us $1.7 billion in financing. The rest, which is about $10.5 billion, is expected from the debt restructuring. So a key success factor of this program is the debt restructuring, which is taking over about 75% of the total financing that is required in order for this program to succeed. But we have not addressed that. We still are way out. Only 8% of our total public debt is enough to give people assurances that we will be debt sustainable. Obviously, that cannot be the case. The other one is that financial sector. Randy, I did not discuss the financial sector issues. The World Bank and the IMF is asking government to resolve the issue of the NIB insolvency.
NIB insolvency.
NIB has not been recapitalized. NIB is sitting on a hold of about 3 billion Ghana cedis. And yet, banks that were solvent and better than NIB were taken and resolved and put into a consolidated bank. To date, government has not capitalized its own bank. And this program specifically mentions NIB as one of those outstanding actions that needed to be taken as part of the banking sector cleanup that was done. And that it should be concluded. We're expected to spend 22 billion on bank recapitalization. 19 billion of that has been described as banking sector resolution bonds. Randy, when you hear resolution bonds, what comes to your mind? Collapse of banks. You resolve banks. And yet, the governor was there a few days ago talking about how his banks have returned to profitability and how they are liquid and well capitalized. And yet, you have gone to IMF to tell them that you will need 19.7 billion to resolve banks.
But what about that 1.5 billion fund?
$15 billion Ghana cedis is supposed to be financial sector stability fund.
Yes.
Which is more like liquidity support.
Yes.
But liquidity is not the same as capitalization.
So you are saying that beyond that, there's a proposal to spend 22 billion on banking sector recapitalization. The financial sector, stability fund is not a capitalization fund. Yeah.
Good. But you need to recapitalize. Why is government looking for 22 billion to recapitalize? Is government the only?
Banks have been given 3 years to bring their own programs how they are going to recapitalize.
Oh, you are just running down my time. Just listen.
I'll just give you the solution that a program has when it comes to bank recapitalization. There's the governor says these banks have been given 3 years.
Why is he intervening? Randy,
and when I was talking,
the owners of the bank are given 3 years to recapitalize.
Yes.
Government of Ghana, are you the owner of those banks? How come you are making provision of 22 billion to recapitalize banks that are not for you? Okay? And then that is your expenditure, 22 billion. Now you come to how you are going to raise the money, and you say banking sector resolution bond.
You want to issue bonds?
You want to issue bonds like you issue to CBG.
That who will buy?
No, they don't issue them to sell.
Right.
You remember when CBG took the banks?
Yes.
They were not giving cash.
Yes.
They issued a bond and gave it to CBG as resolution bonds to cover the difference between the deposit and assets and the liabilities. In other words, another CBG is on the way. Because government does not own the banks and cannot be capitalizing the banks. So, there is envisaged in this program the possibility that some banks will go down and the government will need to intervene in a formula similar to what happened to the 9 banks that they took to CBG. And to CBG, they issued financial sector resolution bonds to CBG. So another 19.7 billion of resolution bonds are expected under this program.
Were those bonds affected by the haircut?
I don't know whether they will recapture. They will do that.
Okay.
So that's one thing. So we should be wary. This is not me. This is them. Good. Revenue. You say e-levy and revenue bills. Who controls government business? If Parliament is supposed to be a rubber stamp, then just scrap it and do what the executive wants. The fact that Parliament disagrees with a policy is not to suggest that they are punished. It is the government that is intransigent in listening. When we rose from Parliament, there were 3 outstanding prior actions for the IMF program in terms of revenue bills. Did we ask them not to take them? They waited until we came back recently before they took them. As we speak, some of them have started implementation from May. Why are you not blaming those ones for this IMF program? 3 of them. The revenue yield expected from those 3 are far more than the e-levy. So stop blaming Parliament for e-levy, because e-levy was a proper protest from the people of Ghana, and we were supposed to serve them. So that cannot be the reason why we are at IMF.
Use the institution of Parliament to
arrears of debt service.
Protect your political
arrears of debt service is a major requirement under this program. You see that debt suspension they have created. That they are not paying debt service for since December to date. A major question is what happens to those arrears that have accrued. And the IMF is saying that from now onwards, don't accrue any debt service in arrears.
So what happens to the interest payments and principals that we have defaulted on between December and when an agreement is reached?
So the negotiations will flesh that out.
Okay.
But almost invariably, creditors are likely to say, look, those are accrued rights. We can only consider you and have an arrangement in respect of the future. But in respect of the past, we have already earned our money. Don't forget that 1 billion of those Euro bonds were guaranteed by the World Bank.
Yes.
Who will have a World Bank guarantee and still scrap payments? They will collect them. So, in addition to that, which already is the problem, part of the problem they are having now is that going forward, don't accrue any new arrears on debt service. That makes the negotiations in respect of not just the bilateral creditors, but the entire spectrum of our debt service, the commercial creditors, okay, who together with the Eurobond holders constitute about 27% of our debt, is the most important angle to look at. To resolve the problem of commercial creditors for the projects and all of that, to resolve the issue of the Eurobonds, which is in excess of $14 billion, these constitute about 27 billion, much more important than the 8% that the bilateral creditors that you are celebrating has. And if you don't address these, then the program will have a faulty leg, because the main question is their sustainability. And if you don't address that, it will not happen. He talks about energy sector losses. Randy, I'm very happy he mentions that. When you have a visionless president and a visionless government, this is where you get to. In 2015-2016, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama began a program to retool and to refurbish our transmission lines in order to reduce these losses, which at the time stood at almost 20% of production. We started from Hunivali. We used GRICO to take a loan from the Alliance Française de Développement on the strength of the balance sheet of GRICO, not government of Ghana. And that project was to extend and refurbish and retool our transmission line from Hunivali in the west all the way to Ashanti region and construct a bigger transmission plant in Kumasi. That is the one recently Napo went to commission with his people and was bragging. That's the John Mahama project. continue from that and retool all the way to Kintampo, build another bigger transmission line there, a station there, continue to Tamale, do the same, continue to Boga, do the same in Adongo, in order to evacuate excess power into the West Africa power pool. So we could sell power to Togo, to Niger, to Mali, and to Burkina Faso, and make money from power. You are still sitting here.
How could you sell?
You are still sitting here. You are still sitting here.
When you have some IPPs that are...
Can you make me talk? You are still sitting here. Talking about power losses from transmission. You are still. But you see, the question he asked, there was a time your friend Gabi asked the same question. And he was exposed badly. A week later, his government, which failed to, after they came to announce those power reduction, which led to Gridco suffering massive bleeding on his balance sheet. The financier, Alain Français Development, said that they had breached all the ratios that they required to service the debt.
Right.
And stopped releasing the monies. The government of Ghana now came to Parliament to now seek for a partial guarantee from the government of Ghana in order for us to sign for them for the financier to continue. In that program, they gave us contracts that have been signed with Mali, Burkina, and Niger that could generate this country $200 million a year. Why? Was that power not expensive? You were claiming that the power there is expensive. And yet you were busy, they were busy signing contracts with you to uptake those expensive power. How much can you lie? How much can you conjecture? And you are still sitting here saying it. You were in that parliament when those renegotiated loans were brought. Now it moved from becoming a Gridco debt to a government of Ghana debt. Which one is viable? You collapse Gridco, they couldn't pay, financier refused to give them the money, the government of Ghana now had to take up the burden in order for funds to be released. And you are here still talking after 6 years. You are still talking about transmission losses. If JM had continued with that vision, we should not be talking about transmission losses. You were busy talking about excess power. When we are giving you power to sell for money, you are not doing the work. That is why we are here. And you can't even now pay your energy bills even after collecting the money. Randy, it is important for us to establish the facts.
And please be loud enough for me.
That the idea that the market was closed to us, the idea that we went to the IMF because we are debt unsustainable, is not an event. What were they thinking when they kept going for $3 billion a year in the Eurobond market? What were they thinking? They didn't know that by going for $3 billion a year, you will get to a point where you cannot pay, your debt will be unsustainable, and the market will pull a brake. And that's what happened. Randy, is it the case that when the central bank governor, and I'm happy you asked the question whether he was not the one working at the IMF, together with Maxwell, a very respected monetarist. You know the former managing director, the former country director of IMF?
Yes.
Who left? Mr. Tuma.
Yes.
That was Tuma's boss.
Okay.
Tuma was posted here to now oversee his boss at Bank of Ghana. And his boss at Bank of Ghana didn't know that when you have reserves, we have something we call buffers. And those buffers serve as shock absorbers in times of headwinds. And that because economies would face headwinds at some point in time, you must prepare for a rainy day. And he was busy throwing the dollars in the market as if it was nobody's business. And when we warned him, he turned a blind eye. So now the headwinds are right. We didn't have forex. We were now in a very terrible situation. When the headwinds arrived, we had borrowed so much that our debt service was no longer containable. And we had to do 129% of debt service to revenue in 2020. 129% of debt service.
That's with which figure?
The figure that the IMF's own Article 4 consultation produced on Ghana for the period 2020 indicates in that report, I think it's about paragraph between 30 to 31 or 32. You will find the IMF report in that Article 4 consultation report that we did 129% of total revenue and grants on debt service. Why? Why won't we be close to the market? Why won't the market pull the brakes? Why will you run an economy up to a point where you have no survivor? There are no shock absorbers. In fact, that same report indicates that when COVID struck, Ghana had zero buffers.
I'll give you the time.
Ghana had zero cash buffers when COVID struck. And that as a result of COVID, the flows that came in from the World Bank, the European Union, and the rest, we developed 0.4% buffers resulting from the flows. So even COVID came to help us. That is what it means. So I'm asking Addison, where in this world will a governor, you remember there was a time I sent a signal here, that there is a rule of thumb that your net international reserve must cover for at least every $2. For every dollar that you have borrowed from non-resident investors, your reserve should cover at least $2 of every dollar. And that our net international cover for our non-resident holdings in our bonds was less than 60 cents. I said that on this program. He denied. Now it is clear that you don't even have it to cover every one kobo. And that you can only build your reserve to 1.74 billion if IMF gives you 1.2 billion and the World Bank gives you $530 million. How do you run an economy like that? How will a central bank governor, who is a regulator that just did banking sector cleanup, sit and watch banks, in spite of the single obligor limit requirement, be committed to 80% of investment to one person, the government of Ghana, and run into such a toxic debt at a point that they were holding almost 80% of their investment? Which rule were you applying? And you turn a blind eye. Even when it became very clear that these bonds were not going to be met, and government was having challenges of rolling over, and you yourself, as a result of that, was now paying for redemptions, you still were encouraging your banks to throw more good money after bad. Today, the end result is that you are now going to resolve banks. In any serious country, this is a jailbird.
All right.